Freddie Mercury had been dead for 3 months. The estate lawyers were still working through the files. Mary Austin was still living in the house. And at 9:47 in the morning, the intercom at the Iron Gate on Logan Place rang. Peter Freestone answered it, a woman's voice, measured, deliberate. "My name is Clara Hartwell. I've come from Sheffield. I have a letter. It's in Freddie's handwriting. I think someone in there needs to see it." The lawyers had never heard of her. She appeared in no document in the estate, not in the will, not in any contract, not in any correspondence. She had never been to this address before in her life. She was 34 years old, she had driven 210 miles before sunrise, and she was standing at the gate of the most private address in Kensington, holding an envelope that contained 214 words written by a man who had been dead for 93 days. And those 214 words said something that 3 months of legal work had completely missed, that this woman and her family had been part of Freddie Mercury's life for 13 years, quietly, invisibly, in a way that nobody, not the people inside that house, not the musicians, not the lawyers, had ever been told about. Who was she? What did the letter say? And why had Freddie Mercury put something this significant onto paper in the last weeks of his life, told no one, and trusted a stranger to carry it to the right door? The answer goes back to a single night in 1978, a city Freddie played once, a cafe that kept its lights on after midnight, and a man at the counter who had no idea who he was talking to. Before we go any further, if you want the stories they buried, the names history quietly left out, the moments that never made the official record, subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications. These are the stories they hoped you would never find. The letter did not begin with an explanation. It began the way conversations between people who already know each other begin mid-thought, no preamble, no ceremony. The first line read, "Clara, I know this will reach you after I'm gone. I've asked Brian to send it when the time comes. I'm writing it now because I want you to have something in my own hand, not just an instruction from a lawyer. You and your father have deserved better than instructions for a long time." Brian, that was the first thing the solicitors could not place. Not a musician, not a manager, not a name anywhere in the public record of Freddie Mercury's professional life. Brian Thompson was a private personal assistant Freddie had employed since 1983, not for the work that appeared in press releases or liner notes, but for work that existed entirely off the books and outside the knowledge of everyone else in Freddie's inner circle. He arranged bank transfers. He delivered envelopes. He maintained on Freddie Mercury's behalf a quiet financial arrangement with a family in the north of England that had been running every single month without exception, without a single missed payment for 8 years before Freddie died, and for 5 years before that, when the payments went to a different name at the same address. 13 years, not one of them documented anywhere in the estate files. When the solicitors tracked Brian Thompson down, he was living in retirement outside Edinburgh. He confirmed the letter immediately. He confirmed the full history. He had kept meticulous records, dates, amounts, transfer references, because he had always understood, even without being told explicitly, that this was the kind of arrangement that might one day require an accounting. The solicitors now had 2 questions, each sitting underneath the other. Not just who was Clara Hartwell, but who was the other name in Brian Thompson's ledger? The name that had received every payment from June 1978 until July 1988, when the transfers shifted to Clara, recorded in Brian's files by a single letter. TT was Thomas Hartwell, Clara's father, and to understand what Freddie Mercury had owed him means going back further than the letter, further than Garden Lodge, back 13 years to a night in Sheffield that nobody was supposed to remember. Thomas Hartwell was 41 years old in June 1978, a steel worker, 3rd generation, the kind of man whose entire life had been built inside a single industry in a single city on the reasonable assumption that the industry would be there when he was done. Sheffield Steel had outlasted 2 world wars and rebuilt a country. It did not occur to men like Thomas, men who had followed their fathers into the mills and expected their sons to follow them, that the machinery could simply stop. But 1978 was already the beginning of the end, and Thomas could feel it. The hours had been cut. The overtime had vanished. 3 children at home, Clara the eldest, 20 years old. A mortgage on a terraced house in the east of the city. and the particular grinding anxiety of a man who has always paid his own way and can feel for the first time that he might not be able to. On June 14, 1978, Queen played Sheffield City Hall. 2,500 seats sold out in hours. After the show, after the venue emptied and the road crew started breaking down the stage, Freddie Mercury left through a side exit with 2 members of his crew and walked 4 blocks through the Sheffield night, looking for somewhere still open. Not a bar, not a hotel lobby, a working cafe, fluorescent lights, formica counters, strong tea, the kind of place that keeps its lights on because somebody always needs it to. Thomas Hartwell was the only customer. He had come in after a late shift, a mug of tea in front of him, and nothing particular to say to anyone. He did not recognize the man who sat down 2 stools to his left. Freddie Mercury was not wearing a costume that night. He was not performing anything. He was a man in a dark jacket who had just finished 3 hours of extraordinary performance and now wanted to sit somewhere ordinary and exist like a person for a while. They talked for 2.5 hours. Nobody took a photograph. Nobody asked for an autograph. There were no witnesses other than the woman behind the counter who would not tell this story to a single journalist for 26 years because she had given him her word that she would not. Margaret Keane gave one interview to a Sheffield local paper in the spring of 2004. She was in her late 70s, and she had kept the promise for 26 years. Freddie had been dead for 13 of them. She had decided that a promise made to a living person carries a different weight than a promise made to a memory. She said she hadn't known who he was that night. Her nephew arrived partway through the conversation. He worked the overnight shift and recognized Freddie on his way through the door. She gestured at the nephew to say nothing. He said nothing. She said the 2 men talked about work, about what it means when the thing you have built your whole life around starts to disappear. She said Freddie listened in a way that surprised her, completely still, completely attentive, not waiting for his turn to speak, actually listening. When Freddie stood up to leave, he took a piece of paper from his jacket pocket, wrote something on it, folded it once, and tucked it under his coffee cup. Not a receipt, something he had written himself. She gave it to Thomas after Freddie had gone. Thomas unfolded it, read it, and put it in his jacket pocket without saying a word. He left 20 minutes later. He never told Margaret what it said. She never saw either of them again. It was a telephone number. Thomas called it 3 days later from a phone box near his house. Brian Thompson answered. He told Thomas that someone who wished to remain anonymous had made this arrangement, and that on the 14th of every month a sum of money would appear in his account. No obligation, no questions, no acknowledgement required. Thomas Hartwell was silent for what Brian later described as a very long time. Then he said yes. The money came. Every 14th, without exception. Thomas died of a heart attack in July 1988, 51 years old. 3 weeks after his funeral, Brian Thompson called Clara. The arrangement would continue. He still did not tell her the source. But Clara Hartwell had been 20 years old on the night of June 14, 1978, and she had been carrying a quiet, unconfirmed suspicion for years. She was not wrong. Gordon Polkinghorne, Freddie's solicitor, later described the discovery of this arrangement as one of the most remarkable aspects of an already remarkable estate to work through, not for its scale, but for its architecture. 13 years. Voluntary, undocumented, maintained through a single intermediary with the discipline of a legal obligation that carried no legal weight whatsoever. He said in a private account that he had never encountered anything quite like it in 30 years of estate law. The solicitors faced a genuine dilemma, and it was not one they could resolve by reading the will more carefully. The letter had no legal standing. It was a private document, handwritten, delivered by a private individual with no legal representation, addressed to no one in the firm and witnessed by nobody. Acting on it meant treating the personal request of a dying man as though it carried the weight of a formal instrument. Ignoring it meant setting aside the documented final wish of the man whose estate they had been charged with administering completely and faithfully. It was not a legal question. It was a question of what kind of people they intended to be when the instructions ran out. Mary Austin answered it. She answered it in 48 hours, not 48 hours of deliberation, by most accounts. but 48 hours of simply needing to sleep on something she had already decided the moment she read the letter. The arrangement would continue. It would be formalized and given proper legal structure so that Clara Hartwell would never need to drive 200 miles before dawn and stand at an iron gate again to make her case. Clara received the solicitor's formal confirmation 3 weeks later, precise, professional, and complete. She has never spoken publicly about the amount. She said only once in a brief conversation with a Sheffield journalist in 2009 that it allowed her to complete a nursing degree she had started and abandoned twice, and that she thinks about Freddie Mercury on the 14th of every month. Not with grief particularly, with something quieter than grief, something that does not have a clean name. What does it mean that this existed? That for 13 years, Freddie Mercury arranged money to reach a family he had known for a single conversation in a cafe at midnight in a city he never went back to and told nobody? Not Mary Austin, not Peter Freestone, not Jim Hutton or Dave Clark, not his manager, not his accountant, not anyone inside the circle of 7 people who believed they held the full map of who he was. The concerts had a story. The albums had a story. The interviews, the photographs, the mythology that grew larger and louder with every year that passed after he died, all of it had a story. All of it was real, and all of it was incomplete, in the way that public accounts of private people are always incomplete. No matter how many of them accumulate, there is always a remainder. Something that didn't make the record because it wasn't meant to, because the person who made it understood the difference between what belongs to an audience and what belongs to the world. The note under the coffee cup has not been found. Thomas Hartwell's family searched through his belongings after his death and did not find it. Brian Thompson does not have a copy. Clara does not remember seeing it among her father's things. A telephone number, written on a folded piece of paper in a Sheffield cafe on the night of June 14th, 1978, and then simply gone absorbed into a jacket pocket and a life and a decade of quiet consequence. The only document that survived is the letter. 214 words, dated October 31st, 1991, 24 days before Freddie Mercury died. Clara asked that it be kept in the Freddie Mercury estate archive, alongside the will, alongside the paperclip. She said she wanted it somewhere it would not get lost. She said it was the right place for it. There is a kind of generosity that refuses to be witnessed, not because it is ashamed, because being seen would change what it is, convert it from an act into a performance, from something given into something displayed. Freddie Mercury understood performance better than almost anyone alive in that era. He knew exactly what the audience's gaze did to a thing, and so he kept certain things entirely away from it. Letters he never published, money he never acknowledged, conversations he asked not to be repeated. The people inside Garden Lodge, the ones who knew him most closely, who had built their lives around proximity to his, did not know about Thomas Hartwell or Clara or the 14th of every month. This is the part that those who loved him find most extraordinary. Not that he did it, that he managed for 13 years to do it without any of them knowing. Margaret Keane said it simply in 2004, without intending it to carry the weight that it does. He didn't want anything from the conversation. He just sat there and listened to a man talk about his life. And when he left quietly. June 14th, 1978. Freddie Mercury had 13 more years ahead of him. Live Aid, Wembley Stadium, the last recordings. A public life that would grow larger after his death than it had ever been during it. And on that specific night, in a fluorescent lit cafe in Sheffield at midnight, something quietly happened that none of that would ever touch or account for or belong to. Clara Hartwell drove 210 miles through the dark to make sure that somebody knew. If you believe the truest stories are the ones nobody thought to write down, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. There are more of them. There always are.